When AC/DC released Power Up in the midst of the UK's second lockdown, I found some reinvigoration in its familiar, yet still explosive tunes. On one hand, it was safe as can be, as safe as any other AC/DC album. But on the other, it felt needed. It was a nostalgic throwback to when stadium rock was a thing that actually existed. And it felt to me like a bit like a much needed live show to boost the adrenaline and lift us from the lockdown blues. And I kind of hoped that the Foo Fighters' new album might be similar. Not in terms of style, but perhaps in terms of impact. The Foo Fighters, the band who brought us the adrenaline-pumping rock brilliance of colour and shape, and more recently they brought us Wasting Light, an album which exemplified everything great that a stadium rock album can still do in this day and age. And in this third lockdown that I find myself in the UK, I just want something that's gonna boost the heart rate of my lethargic body, that would make me headbang in my chair until my neck hurts. But alas, Medicine at Midnight doesn't make me headbang, so much as it makes me tap gently along with its groovy rhythms on my desk. It's really unadulterated radio rock, friendly enough for even the most guitar-averse person to enjoy. First things first though, that album cover, I'm not quite sure what's going on with it, but I think it just looks horrible. I mean, look, I like eyes as much as the next person, but neon Andy Warhol pop art-esque eyes on a Foo Fighters record? I don't know, it just to me looks a bit like a bargain bin record from the 1980s that I wouldn't pick up, and I certainly wouldn't wear it on a shirt. I don't know what was going on there. Anyway, the pre-release interviews for this album positioned it as the Foo Fighters' most danceable album, a pop-inspired affair, inspired by David Bowie's Let's Dance, a little bit similar to what the pre-release stuff was saying about Steven Wilson's new album. And this is certainly the Foo's most pop-oriented album, though Concrete and Gold, with its very slick production, I wouldn't argue is a million miles away, especially maybe compared to Wasting Light. The most obvious song which really demonstrates this newer direction is the lead single, Shame, Shame, which admittedly was a bit of a surprise when I first heard it. Of all the tracks on the record, it's the one which, well, it's certainly one of the ones which commits the most to the 80s pop style. It slinks along with the guitar parts, driven by rhythmic flourishes rather than the driving power chords one might expect, and it's quite understated for a Foo Fighters single. You kind of expect it to start to take off like All My Life or The Pretender at some point, but that point never really comes. The highest point it crescendos to is some cliched stadium rock ohs, when Dave would inevitably get the audience to sway along. Though a bit of a standout from this is Taylor's drum groove. Despite much of the drums being looped, if you listen to the core drums quite a bit, you'll notice some really interesting percussive touches that Taylor adds to the core groove, which gives the song a really solid backbone. But unfortunately, outside of Taylor, the O's sound so cliche, and the chorus consisting of just the word shame with little variation just starts to wear thin after a while. It lacks enough groove in the bass or the riffs to be a fun, danceable tune, but then also doesn't really have a substantial melody or chorus to make up for that and to hook you in. It's just a song that after first hearing it, I really didn't have a desire to listen to it again, but wondered if it would grow on me. And I have to say, after hearing it like 5 times for this review, I'm still not particularly impressed. While Shame Shame maybe more obviously demonstrates the newer direction somewhat, the song which really exemplifies it is the title track, Medicine at Midnight. With some whispered vocal parts, it's a percussive driven track, relying again more on rhythm than riffs, or guitar generally to propel it along. It definitely does feel like Grohl trying to channel his hero Bowie into this one. And I do think Medicine at Midnight is a more successful song than Shame Shame. I think it probably would have made a better lead single. It's got a more classically Foo Fighters chorus to it. It swells up with oohs and ahs behind Grohl's voice, and it even kicks into a very Stevie Ray inspired guitar solo. Very Let's Dance Stevie Ray inspired. In fact, it sounds like it must have been played by a Fender Strat for a tube screamer or something, because it is a damn good tonal impression. I mean, it doesn't quite have that spark that Stevie did, but I mean, hell, who does? It's certainly the song which really nails the aesthetic the best that Grohl is trying to do across this album. It combines the strengths of his voice with some of the strengths of 80s pop grooves. The bass is higher in the mix, and that really provides a nice little kick. And the solo, I mean, the Foo Fighters aren't a band you tend to really think of that much about guitar solos, but it's a really nice little solo, even if it's a little derivative, and it's quite a cool tune, the title track. But you can hardly say that the Foos really fully commit to the Bowie-inspired ideals that the title track strives for. There are other 80s touches scattered about, maybe more haphazardly. You can find gospel singers in the opener, Making a Fire, which is a bit different for a Foos opening track. But really, if you strip back the frills and fancy touches on a lot of these songs, most of it wouldn't have felt out of place at all on Concrete and Gold. And that was a record which did underwhelm me a bit, despite having some strong moments. It just seemed to be establishing the Foo Fighters more as a formula rather than as an interesting artist. And I do think that despite Grohl making some efforts to pull away from Foo Fighters TM the brand, with the addition of a funky riff here or a cool groove there, the lore of big stadium rock concerts has just proved a bit too big, and it overwhelms some of the more interesting elements of the album, bogging it down in a sea of fairly mediocre and forgettable songs. For example, Making a War is kind of cool the first time you hear it, but I'll be damned if I can remember the chorus, and I've listened to it quite a few times now. And it's not that I have a bad memory, it's just other than the na 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 of the gospel singers, there's none that really sticks with you. In fact, you may have heard me make quite a few references to the various sounds of this album, more than the lyrics, the O's and the na-na-nas and, you know, the onomatopoeia. And that's not accidental, because it seems this is like the Moore's Law of the Foo Fighters. So Moore's Law, if you're not aware, is this observation that the number of transistors in a circuit doubles about every 2 years, which is quite important when you're thinking about processing power and computational speeds and things. But I feel we could make a little bit of a similar statement with the Foo Fighters now, that it seems every release, the amount of oohs and ahs and things just doubles with every album. The rest of the album is fairly predictable. I just think the songwriting is fundamentally lacking, even compared to Concrete and Gold. There were some really nice songs on that. T-shirt was quite interesting. Sky's a Neighborhood was a big foot stomping tune. The lead single, Run, was quite good. But here, a lot of it just falls flat for me. Take No Son of Mine, a clear tribute to Dave's friend Lemmy of Motorhead. It very clearly channels the Ace of Spades riff. But one of my big issues with the album comes up here, and it's the production. The production is so clean and clinical and pop friendly that on this song it makes Ozzy's last record feel raw. No Son of Mine's derivative Ace of Spades riff just feels so watered down. It lacks a lot of the driving force, the oomph and roughness that makes Motorhead sound so damn great. And sure, it's Foo Fighters' take on it, it's not a direct recreation. And the chorus has its moments, but it just feels so restrained and held back on the musical front that it just doesn't connect with me, at least. But then Waiting on the War is the centerpiece of the album. Maybe it's my favourite song. It's between that and Medicine at Midnight. They're probably the only songs I'd really listen to from it. But Waiting on a War is quite corny. I mean, it's really corny. As Dave sings that he just wants to love everyone over a string arrangement so sappy it'd make Chris Martin blush. But, I don't know, call me soft, but there is something about a Dave power ballad that I just can't help but be suckered in by. And many of my favourite Foo songs, like the criminally underrated But Honestly, are those which are just big power ballads. They start slow and then they just explode at the end. And Waiting for a War certainly has a payoff that makes it worth the kind of cheesy wait. The vocals start to speed up and Taylor comes in, this crashing drum part. It all kicks into fifth gear in quite a satisfying way. I definitely think it'd be impressive live, but yeah, it's one of maybe 2 tracks out of 9 that I'd really come back and listen to on this album. Hardly a best song of the year contender either. Look, perhaps I've seemed a bit negative and dismissive, but it's not my intention. This album just fails to really infuse me, and I'm kind of sad about that. The Foo Fighters are one of the great live bands of our time. There's few bands who can put on as great of a stadium rock show full of funny anecdotes and terrific covers and even better hits. The Foos have a wonderfully deep back catalogue and classic singles for days. But maybe you might think I'm a bit over the top saying this, but I just feel Medicine at Midnight is their creative death now. I wasn't a big fan of Sonic Highways, Concrete and Gold never really gripped me, and now with Medicine at Midnight, I'm just starting to think that while they will always remain, I'm sure, a wonderful live band, and I'd love to see them on the next tour, the material on this album and some of the stuff in the last couple feels a bit, as a reviewer I saw from The Guardian put it, that these are just songs that you're going to go to the toilet drawing when you see the Foos live. You're going to be waiting instead for Everlong and Monkey Wrench and going to the toilet drawing Shame, Shame. And it is a shame. As a creative force, I'm starting to wonder if there is any gas left in the tank. I mean, not that Grohl's legacy will be affected either way. I mean, the drummer of Nirvana, one of the most successful rock musicians of the 2000s, as a frontman, the nice guy of rock and roll. He's still a guy I admire greatly, but for the first time, I'm just not sure I really care what the Foo Fighters do next. I really hope to be surprised, but I don't really have any expectations. I think creatively they're a spent force, and I really do hope that they one day prove me wrong. This has been TheAIbumMan. Thank you so much for watching my review of Medicine at Midnight by the Foo Fighters. Please tell me what you think in the comments below, and subscribe, like, dislike, do whatever you want. And yeah, this has been TheAIbumMan. Thanks for watching. Long live rock and roll.